They say grief makes you see things that aren't there. But that day, under the gray, bitter sky with rain trickling down the cracked headstone, I saw exactly what was there. And it wasn't grief, it was deception. Calculated, cold, practiced. My father, Thomas Wexley, had always been a pillar in our community. An old-school Southern gentleman with a steel spine and a softer heart he tried to hide. He'd built his business from the ground up, never took a handout. Never owed a soul, or so I thought. I stood by his casket, my hands trembling under the black lace gloves I had borrowed from my cousin. Everything about the day felt borrowed. The priest's voice, the tears I couldn't summon. Even the crowd, stiff-lipped old men, family friends who'd known us for years, felt like extras in a play I didn't audition for. Then I saw him, Uncle Gerald. He was dressed in a crisp navy suit, the kind that looked tailor-made. Too clean, too new, too expensive for a man who used to borrow my dad's lawn mower and forget to return it. He stood at the edge of the gathering, arms crossed over his chest, not in grief, but in pride. That kind of smug pride you can't scrub off with holy water. I watched him the way a hawk watches a snake, knowing it's dangerous, but too fascinated to look away. When the eulogy ended and the crowd began to murmur and drift toward their cars, I stayed behind. I needed a moment alone. With him, with my father, with the silence. "You always said death brought out the truth in people," I whispered to the coffin. "Well, let's see." That's when I heard it, a voice behind me, just loud enough to be heard over the wind. Shame he didn't sign the new will in time. I turned. Gerald stood just a few steps away, his hands in his pockets, his mouth curling into a half-smile. "What did you just say?" He blinked slowly, as if realizing he'd said too much, but then he smiled wider. "Nothing, darling. Just thinking aloud, you know how grief messes with the mind." He walked away before I could answer. I watched his back retreat between the rows of headstones, each step echoing like a threat. Later that evening, after the wake, the house was too quiet. Too many casseroles on the table. Too many framed pictures of a man who no longer breathed. Too many people asking if I was okay when I clearly wasn't. That's when it hit me. Something was missing. The safe. Dad's old fireproof safe, tucked behind the bookshelf in his study. He always said, "Everything that matters is in there, kiddo. If anything ever happens to me, that's where you go first." So I went. The shelf slid open with a groan. The safe sat there just like I remembered, but the key, usually taped under the top shelf, was gone. I tore the place apart. Nothing, no key, no sign of a break-in. Just a faint smell of cologne, Gerald's cologne. I stood still, my heart thudding, trying to believe I was just being paranoid. But I wasn't. The next day the lawyer confirmed it. A new will had surfaced. Dated a week before my father died. Everything, his house, his money, his company, was left to Gerald. I was mentioned once. A small trust fund for educational purposes, as if I was a 12-year-old needing help with tuition. I was 29, I had a degree, I had debt, and now apparently I had no father and no future. He was planning to update the will, the lawyer mumbled apologetically. But it appears this was the final signed version. Lies. I knew my father, he would never have done that, not willingly. The days that followed blurred into grief and confusion. I stayed in my cheap apartment, refusing calls, ignoring messages. Gerald sent flowers once with a card that read, "We're still family, let's move on." I burned it in my sink, but then something strange happened. A call, blocked number, a shaky voice. "Miss Wexley?" The woman whispered. "I used to clean your father's office. I found something the night he died, something your uncle dropped." She hung up before I could ask anything else, but she left a package at my doorstep. Inside, a flash drive and a torn envelope. The flash drive had scanned documents, photos of the real will. My name, my rightful inheritance, but no signatures. The envelope? It was addressed to Gerald, dated 3 weeks before the funeral, with a simple note inside in my father's handwriting. "If you're reading this, I know what you've done. You have 24 hours to fix it." I stared at that note for hours, my breath shallow, my fists clenched. Every instinct screamed, go to the police, go to the lawyer, fight it. But another voice whispered louder, make him pay. He hadn't just taken my money. He had desecrated my father's memory. He had stolen my past, my future, and laughed at my pain. This wasn't about reclaiming what was mine anymore. This was about revenge. And I was going to give him the slowest, most agonizing descent into madness he could imagine. I didn't sleep the night after I read the letter. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope beside me, my mind racing like a freight train with no brakes. I stared at the words again and again. My father knew. He knew Gerald was planning something. And he tried to stop it, but death came too soon. Or maybe it came too conveniently. That thought chilled me, not just because it suggested something darker, but because I realized Gerald had no limits. The next morning, I returned to my father's house, not mine anymore, according to the forged will. The estate lawyer had informed me I had a week to remove any personal items. After that, it belonged entirely to Gerald. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was already there. Perfect. He was standing by the rose bushes, trimming them like he belonged there. I stood behind the gate, watching the deliberate way he clipped the stems, humming softly. My mother had planted those bushes. He knew that. It felt like desecration. You always hated gardening, I said, stepping forward. Gerald turned. His face brightened like we were old friends. Ah, Rebecca, thought you'd come sooner. You know, you don't need to be a stranger. I stared at him. Where's the real Will? He blinked just once, but I saw it, the flicker, like a candle threatened by wind, a flash of recognition, panic, then buried under that smug mask again. You're still spinning those fantasies? He said, chuckling. I know grief makes you desperate, but I had the paperwork verified. Legally, ethically, everything's solid. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. He wrote you a letter. Said he knew what you were doing. Did you get that before or after he died? He looked at me sharply. I saw it again. Fear. I don't know what you're talking about, he said too quickly. You need to let go of these delusions. I leaned in, almost nose to nose. I'm not letting go, Gerald. You didn't just steal my father's money. You stole him. You erased his final intentions. I will undo every inch of what you built on those lies. Then I turned and walked into the house. His voice followed me like smoke. If you keep pushing, you might end up just like him. My blood froze. I didn't look back. Inside, the air was stale, but it smelled of memories, old wood, faint cologne, the leather of Dad's favorite chair. I headed straight to the study. The bookshelf still looked untouched, but when I checked the drawer below the safe, something was missing. Not just the key, a folder too. One that used to hold tax records, letters, drafts, gone. He hadn't just stolen the will. He'd cleaned house. I checked every drawer, every corner, every photo frame that could hide a clue. It was like searching for a ghost in an abandoned house, until I reached behind the grandfather clock. A dusty envelope fell out. Inside, 3 Polaroids and a single index card. The card read, "If something happens to me, this wasn't an accident." The Polaroids were blurry but familiar. My dad at the lawyer's office, a document in hand. I recognized the signature. His, and the lawyer's. I was shaking. He did sign the real will. I needed help, but not from the police. Not yet. Instead, I called Jamie. Jamie DeSoto had been my best friend since college. Now, she was a freelance investigative journalist with a soft spot for scandal. And a sharper nose for lies than anyone I knew. When I explained everything to her, she didn't hesitate. "I'm in," she said, "but you need to be smart about this. If Gerald finds out you're building a case, he'll bury the rest of the evidence. And maybe you too." I wasn't afraid, not anymore. I was furious. Over the next few days, Jamie helped me start a quiet investigation. We dug into Gerald's phone records, which she accessed through a gray hat friend in telecom. We found multiple calls around the time of my father's death to a notary who mysteriously vanished afterward. We interviewed the cleaning lady who left me the package. She was terrified but confirmed she'd seen Gerald in the study the night my father died, despite Gerald claiming he was out of town. And then came the biggest clue. Jamie discovered surveillance footage from a nearby gas station. It showed Gerald filling his car with gas less than 5 miles from the house, exactly at the time he claimed to be 3 states away. He was there. He lied, and something told me he hadn't just forged a document. Something told me he might help my father die faster than nature intended. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the index card again. This wasn't an accident. I closed my eyes and saw Gerald smirk. He needed to pay, but not with prison. That would be too simple, too clean. No, I wanted him to feel it, to spiral, to fall. I wanted him to lose control of the one thing he loved more than anything else, his mind. I never thought walking into my childhood home would feel like trespassing. But there I was, standing in the foyer, where every creak in the floor sounded like a warning. The scent was familiar, like cedar and old books, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a crime scene, and I wasn't the cop, I was the ghost. The worst part? Legally, it wasn't mine. Not a floorboard, not a doorknob. According to Gerald's new will, I was nothing more than a guest with a deadline. I had 3 days left to clear out my belongings before he changed the locks. I had grown up in this house. Every chipped corner of the wall, every coffee ring on the wood counter, every squeaky stair, those were memories, not flaws. but now they felt like broken parts of a past I couldn't touch anymore. I walked through the hallway, my fingers grazing the edge of picture frames still hanging on the walls. Some had been rearranged, my childhood photos pushed into corners, while Gerald had added newer ones of himself at gala events, handshakes with business partners, ribbon cuttings like he'd built the empire. He hadn't built anything. He'd stolen it. The living room was colder than I remembered. The fireplace was empty, and Dad's favorite leather armchair was gone, replaced with something modern and soulless. I stood in the center of the room, trying to remember the last real conversation I had with my father. It was just days before his heart failed. "You don't trust him," I had said. Dad had nodded slowly, eyes tired. "There's something wrong with Gerald. Always has been. I just never thought he'd go this far." He never got the chance to explain what this far meant. The plan was already in motion. I sat down on the edge of the old window seat. A place I used to read books as a girl, legs curled under me, warm tea in hand. Now my fingers gripped the wood, knuckles white. Gerald's voice echoed from upstairs. He was home. I could hear him talking on the phone, pacing. His voice was animated, too cheerful. It always got like that when he lied. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help it. "She's still clinging to the idea that I forged something," he said, laughter in his tone. "Poor thing. She doesn't realize how airtight this all is. Even if she had evidence, no one would take her seriously. She's too emotional." There was a pause, then a darker tone. "Besides, if she pushes any harder, I can always remind her what happened to Tom." I stopped breathing. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What had happened to Tom? His death had been ruled a heart attack. Quick, clean, unremarkable for a man in his late 60s. But Dad had never complained of chest pains, never had high blood pressure. He was careful. He always walked every morning, took his vitamins like it was religion. Could Gerald have? No, that was too far even for him, wasn't it? I stood slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. I couldn't confront him, not yet. I needed proof. I needed to show the world the monster he was behind that charming facade. If I struck too soon, it would look like jealousy, grief, or worse, paranoia. I needed him to unravel. That night I stayed in the guest bedroom. I told him I needed one more night to sort through my things. He smiled and nodded. "Of course, take your time. I'll be out early in the morning anyway, charity event." I lied too, told him I appreciated his generosity, that it meant a lot. And when he turned his back, I watched him walk away like I was measuring his spine for a knife. While he slept, I went to work. In the basement was the fuse box, and next to it, the old gas line that fed the rarely used stove in the secondary kitchen. I didn't touch it, of course. I wasn't trying to hurt him, not physically. But I did leave the faintest trail of cinnamon and sulfur from the scented oil. I dabbed in a line across the floor leading into the hallway. Gerald was sensitive to smells, always had been. "Hypersensitive nervous system," Dad used to say. The next morning he mentioned it casually. "Is there something burning?" he asked, sniffing. I shook my head. "I don't smell anything." He frowned, mumbling something about maybe needing to call an inspector. I smiled as I sipped my coffee. Seed 1, planted. Later that day, while he was out, I returned with a small bag of items from a novelty store downtown. Things designed for pranks, really? Non-toxic fake mold, an old mechanical chirper that let out high-pitched squeals like a rat in the walls every few hours, and most importantly, a tiny vial of menthol-infused oil that caused mild nausea and lightheadedness when applied to vents. That night, I waited until midnight and placed the chirper inside the wall vent in his study. By morning, he was on edge. "Do you hear that noise? I think we have rats." I frowned. "Really? I haven't heard anything." His eyes narrowed. "Maybe it's in the walls, I'll have someone look." But his hands were shaking when he poured his coffee. By the third night, I moved the chirper to the hallway outside his room, then applied a drop of the menthol oil to his water glass. He barely touched dinner. "I feel dizzy," he muttered, "and I swear I saw something in the mirror, just a flicker." I leaned forward, concerned. "Gerald, are you okay? Maybe you should see someone, maybe you're overworked." He grunted, "I'm fine, just tired." The plan was working. Every small suggestion, every tiny push, it was leading him somewhere. To the edge, and soon, he wouldn't know what was real anymore. There's a kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. It's subtle, a little too long, a little too still. Gerald wore that smile often, like it was stitched into his skin, but even stitched things can be unraveled. He came back from his charity event that evening unusually quiet. No stories about the guest list, no humble brags about the donation totals. Just a nod as he passed me in the kitchen and a muttered, "Something feels off." I raised an eyebrow, off how? He hesitated, like the heiress heavier. I almost laughed. That's the menthol in your vents, Gerald. But I kept my expression neutral. Instead, I offered him chamomile tea laced with just enough lemon balm to keep him restless. Not poisoned, just uncomfortable. Foggy, vulnerable, he didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I heard him pacing upstairs, then he started humming, the same tune on repeat. A low, tuneless mumble that made the hairs on my neck rise. At breakfast, he stared into his plate of eggs like they were speaking to him. "I think I need to see a doctor," he said finally. "Oh," I feigned concern. "You've always been so healthy." "I've been forgetful lately. And I'm seeing things, just glimpses, shadows. I thought I saw someone in the hallway last night." "That sounds serious," I said, my voice just above a whisper. "You don't think it's dementia, do you?" He looked at me sharply. "Don't joke about that." I wasn't joking. He didn't eat another bite. After he left for his appointment, I crept into his office. The chirper was still going, though I had adjusted its timer to random intervals now, just enough to drive him crazy without making a clear pattern. I opened his desk drawer and found a notepad filled with scribbles. Names, dates, calculations, then symptoms. Things he was tracking. Nausea after 6 p.m. Sounds in wall. Black spot in mirror. Coffee tastes strain. Rebecca, he'd circled my name. I smiled. The doubt had taken root. I replaced the notepad exactly as I found it, then returned to my room. That night I set phase 2 into motion. A single candle. That's all it took. I lit it around 3 a.m. and placed it inside the hallway near his room. Just enough for a faint flickering glow to bounce off the mirror. Then I knocked lightly on his door and ran back to mine. "Hello?" he called out, then louder. "Rebecca." He opened the door. I peeked through my barely cracked door as he stepped into the hall. He froze. What the hell? I had left a mirror at the end of the hallway. One from the attic, old, cracked, its silver backing warped by time. And in the dim candlelight his reflection was distorted. He gasped, staggered back. I rushed out playing my role. "What's wrong?" I thought I saw someone in the mirror, someone else, not me." I touched his shoulder gently. "You're not sleeping enough, your mind's playing tricks." He didn't argue. By morning, Gerald was unraveling faster than I'd expected. His once pristine shirt was wrinkled, and his hands trembled when he held his glass. He refused coffee, asked if the water tasted strange. "Maybe it's time to take a break," I offered. "You've been working nonstop since Dad died. Why not a little rest, maybe even talk to someone?" "A therapist," he scoffed. "You think I'm crazy." "Of course not," I paused. "But if you were, wouldn't it help to catch it early?" That night he didn't leave his room, and I didn't sleep. I was too busy moving the chirper again, this time to the floorboards under his bed. By 4 a.m., I heard him slam his fist against the wall. "Shut up," he screamed. I smiled under the covers. The next morning, Gerald didn't come down for breakfast. I brought a tray to his room and found him hunched in the corner, staring at the window. "Did you hear it again?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. I set the tray down and sat across from him. "You know," I said, choosing each word carefully, "I read about this thing once. It's called induced paranoia. Happens when people are too isolated, too stressed. Their minds start to fill in gaps. They start to see patterns that aren't there." He looked at me like I had slapped him. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm trying to help you," I whispered, "because no one else will." And then I left. I needed him to need me. I needed him to believe I was the only one who understood, who cared, because soon he would have no one else. Later that day, Jamie called. "I found something," she said. "Gerald's been draining the estate fast. Pulling money into shell companies, offshore accounts. He knows this won't last." Good, he was panicking, but I wanted him to suffer more than financially. I wanted him to crumble from the inside. That night, I left a single item on his desk. A handwritten note, no signature. "You know what you did, so do I." When he found it the next morning, he locked himself in his room for hours. By evening, he was back in the kitchen, pale, sweating, and twitchy. "I need a doctor. Not just a regular one. I need someone who knows things, someone who can see what's happening to me." I nodded slowly. "I might know someone." He grabbed my wrist. "Please." That was all I needed. The hook was in. And soon, I would reel him into the darkness he built for himself. I knew Gerald well enough to predict his next move. He would cling to any thread of control, any illusion of understanding, rather than admit the truth. He was losing his grip, so I gave him a lifeline. I introduced him to Dr. Leland Carr. a fictitious specialist in cognitive stress disorders and parapsychological trauma. His office, a rented suite downtown that Jamie had outfitted with just enough props to look legitimate, certificates in gilded frames, medical books arranged by color, and a vintage stethoscope placed conspicuously on the desk. Doctor. Carr was played by Jamie's friend Theo, an out-of-work actor with a gift for gravitas and just enough charm to earn Gerald's trust. I watched from the observation room as Gerald sat across from him, twitching, sweating, eyes darting to corners of the room as if the shadows themselves whispered. "I'm hearing things," he confessed, "seeing things, smelling things that aren't there." Theo leaned forward. "How long has this been happening?" "A few weeks, maybe longer." I thought it was stress. "But it's not, it's something else, something wrong with me." Theo nodded slowly, his voice a velvet knife. "Sometimes the mind plays tricks when there's unresolved guilt, trauma. Are there any events you haven't fully processed?" Gerald hesitated. "I didn't kill him," he said abruptly. Theo didn't ask who. "I didn't, he was sick, it just happened." The silence that followed stretched like taut wire. I could almost hear the tension snapping in Gerald's chest. When the session ended, Gerald looked more shaken than relieved. That was the point. He didn't need hope. He needed dread with no name. Back at the house, I returned to my room as if nothing had happened. But that night, I heard his footsteps outside my door. Pausing, hovering, I didn't move. Let him wonder what I was dreaming. The next day, he was a mess. He fumbled with his keys, dropped a glass of water, and asked me twice if it was Wednesday. It was Monday. I continued my role as the concerned niece, preparing his tea, gently suggesting therapy, always worried that maybe, just maybe, something was really wrong. And then it happened. I was in the study, cleaning. At least that's what I told him. In truth, I was scanning every inch of the room for signs of the original will or anything my father had hidden before his death. And then I noticed something odd. The bottom drawer of the old filing cabinet didn't quite sit flush. When I tugged at it, nothing moved. But on a hunch, I removed the drawers above it and peeked behind the panel. A wooden plank screwed into place had a single slit down the center. Hidden, clever, and old, this was my father's work. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver and pried it open. Inside were several folded letters, yellowed with age, and a small, cloth-bound journal. I held my breath as I read the first letter. It was addressed to me. "Rebecca, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to tell you in person. I should have trusted you sooner. Your uncle, he's not who he pretends to be. I don't know how far he'll go, but I fear it may be deadly. He's been forging documents, selling company assets under my name. I've spoken to my lawyer about updating the will. I fear Gerald's suspects. If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Find the black key. It opens the deposit box. The original documents are there." I pressed the paper to my chest, eyes stinging. My father had known. He had tried to stop it. But he'd also trusted me to finish what he couldn't. The journal was worse. Page after page of notes. Conversations, suspicions, financial discrepancies, even a transcript of a phone call he'd overheard between Gerald and an unknown associate about cutting loose ends. My hands trembled as I read. Gerald hadn't just betrayed him, he might have murdered him. The rage that boiled in my veins was almost too much to hold, but I couldn't act on it, not yet. I needed to find the deposit box, the black key. I knew where it had to be, in the old shed behind the house, the one my father always kept locked. That night, while Gerald slept, after downing the valerian lace tea I prepared, I crept out in the dark. The shed groaned open with effort. Inside, dust, tools, and a rusted tackle box. I opened it, and there it was, a single black key on a leather cord. I slipped it into my pocket and walked back inside with a new sense of clarity. The finish line was in sight. But I wouldn't run, I'd drag him there, screaming. When I returned to the house, Gerald was in the hallway, wild-eyed, clutching a kitchen knife. "Who's there?" he whispered. I heard someone in the shed. I stared at him calmly. "There's no one, Gerald." "Don't lie to me," he shouted. I took a step closer. "Why would I lie? You're not well, maybe you need another session." He dropped the knife, knees buckling. I caught him before he hit the floor. "I don't know what's happening to me," he sobbed. I smiled into his hair. "I do." I tucked him into bed like a child. He didn't protest. Just lay there, eyes wide, staring at a ceiling that surely looked like it was closing in on him. And as I shut the door behind me, I knew what came next. The key, the box, and the truth that would be too much for his mind to bear. People always said I was the quiet one, the calm niece. The polite daughter who never raised her voice, never rebelled, never made trouble. Gerald used to joke that I was forgettable. He said it to my face once, smirking while sipping Dad's whiskey like he owned it. "You're too soft for this world, Becca," he'd said. "Stick to books and leave the sharks to the water." That was the moment I started planning, because they never see it coming from the quiet ones. I kept my head down for years, played my role. Let them underestimate me while I watched, listened, learned. I knew every weak point in our family business. Every person Gerald leaned on. Every lie he repeated until he believed it. I knew him better than he thought I did. Better than he did. So while he crumbled upstairs, tormented by shadows and a mind fraying at the seams, I was building the endgame. That morning, I left early, before the sun rose, before the doubts could creep in. I drove 3 towns over to a small regional bank that my father had used for years. Not one of the big names. One of those discreet, old money vaults where you had to buzz in and show ID 3 times before anyone even greeted you. I presented the black key. The manager, a thin woman with silver hair and the wary look of someone trained to recognize drama before it walks through the door, led me down to the safety deposit box vault. The box slid open with a heavy click like the past unlocking itself. Inside, a manila envelope thick with documents, a flash drive, a sealed letter again addressed to me. I read it standing right there in the vault, the humming fluorescence buzzing like background noise in a horror film. "Rebecca, if you've made it this far, then you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I'm sorry for that. I always thought I was protecting you by keeping you out of the darker corners of my world. Turns out, I was just making you fight blind. This envelope contains the real will. Dated, signed, notarized, done properly, 3 days before my death. Gerald found out, I don't know how, but I suspect he has someone on the inside. You'll also find evidence of embezzlement, false accounting, and one particularly incriminating recording of Gerald making threats on a phone call. If you're reading this and you still want justice, use it. If not for me, then for yourself." I blinked fast, trying not to cry. I didn't cry for my father. I cried because I realized just how far this man, my own uncle, had gone to erase me. To erase us. The documents were enough to tear Gerald's world apart. One call to the right lawyer, the right reporter, and it would all be over. But I didn't want it to be over. I wanted it to be slow. I wanted him to unravel like he made my father unravel in his final days, helpless, doubted, alone. I returned home quietly. Gerald hadn't come out of his room all day. Good. That night, I went into his office and replaced the fake will he kept in his desk with the real one. Then I texted him from a burner phone. "Look in the drawer. You left something behind." 30 minutes later, I heard him scream. I didn't go to him. I let the silence grow thick. The next morning, the real performance began. At breakfast, I acted surprised when he slammed the will down on the kitchen table. "Where did you get this?" he hissed. I blinked, confused. "What is it?" "You know damn well what this is." "Gerald, what are you talking about?" His hands were shaking. "I'm not crazy," he muttered. "You're trying to make me think I'm crazy, but I'm not." "Okay," I said gently. "Do you want to talk to Dr. Carr again?" He went silent. That afternoon, he left the house. I followed him discreetly. He drove to a church, sat inside for an hour, just sat. He was praying. For what? Forgiveness or clarity? Didn't matter. I needed him desperate. I needed him haunted. So that night, I took the next step. A simple one. I switched out his shampoo with a tingling scalp serum mixed with cayenne oil. Harmless but painful like fire ants on your head. He screamed in the shower, threw the bottle across the bathroom. I ran in, feigning panic. "What happened?" "My scalp is burning," he yelled. I inspected the bottle. "It says it's herbal." "Maybe you're having a reaction." He glared at me. "You did this." "I just got it from the drugstore." "You're lying." I knelt next to him, trying not to smile. "Gerald, I think you're sick." He turned away. It was working. He was beginning to question everything. His senses, his health, me. And now, the final push. The next day, I mailed anonymous copies of the real will and embezzlement documents to his lawyer, 2 journalists, and the police tip line. I knew Gerald would hear about it within hours, and when he did, it would feel like the walls were collapsing. I wanted him to look around and see me everywhere. The girl he forgot, the niece he erased, the shadow he couldn't outrun. That night, as thunder cracked the sky and rain pelted the roof like tiny fists, Gerald burst into my room without knocking. He looked deranged. His eyes bloodshot, shirt half-buttoned, stubble on his face for the first time in years. "You think this is funny?" he screamed. "You think you're going to win?" I stood up slow and calm. "I don't think anything, Gerald." He lunged toward me but stumbled. His hands hit the wall. He looked at them confused like they weren't his. I'm seeing things, he whispered, things that aren't there. I stepped forward. Maybe that's your guilt finally showing up. I didn't kill him, he breathed. It just happened. I stared at him, silent, and in that silence I let him fall apart. The girl he thought would never fight back was now the only thing he saw in his nightmares. By the end of that week, Gerald no longer resembled the polished man who had once strode through life with confidence dripping off him like cologne. His suit jackets were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his breath always smelled faintly of panic. He had started whispering to himself, fragments of thoughts, unfinished sentences. Sometimes he would pause mid-conversation, staring into a corner like it had just spoken back. And that's when I knew he no longer trusted his own mind. I had taken everything from him except one thing, his health, so I made him believe that too was slipping. It started with fatigue, easy enough. A few replaced vitamins with harmless starch pills, a sprinkle of valerian in his tea, and he began feeling heavy, sluggish. I watched him move slower each day, rubbing his eyes like they ached from dreams he couldn't remember. I feel like I'm floating, he told me once, seated at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. I tilted my head with concern. Have you been eating enough? I can't taste anything, he muttered. Everything tastes metal. That part wasn't true. His taste buds were fine, but the brain. Oh, it listens to suggestion better than any organ in the body. And when it starts believing the body is broken, it makes it so. The next step was even easier. I slipped a harmless digestive capsule into his vitamin container, one that caused mild dizziness and light dehydration. Still safe, still non-toxic, but his body began whispering new messages. He blamed the house, then the water, then the air itself. I think there's mold, he said one morning, standing in the middle of the living room like a man lost in his own skin. I played my part to perfection. You might be right, I replied. I'll call someone. I didn't, of course not. That night, I moved the chirper to the attic and set it to go off every few hours. The soft, persistent sound of squeaking, not loud enough to be identified, but just enough to make the silence feel crowded. At 3:47 a.m., he burst into my room. There are rats in the attic, he shouted, wild-eyed. I sat up bleary-eyed. I didn't hear anything. He backed away like I'd grown fangs. How can you not hear them? They're scratching the walls, clawing. Maybe you should see a real doctor, I said carefully. I saw your doctor. That fake you sent me to. I froze, he was trembling. There's no doctor, Carr. I checked the address again today. The office was gone. It's a damn furniture showroom. I stared at him stunned. He found out. I hadn't expected him to retrace his steps so soon. But the beauty of unraveling someone's mind is that, even when they discover one truth, they begin to doubt every other one. You must be confused, I said softly. Doctor. Carr works with trauma patients. Maybe you went to the wrong suite. I'm not crazy, he whispered. I reached for his hand. He pulled away like I was venom. Then why are you shaking? I asked. He said nothing. Just turned and fled the room. The next day I left an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No name, no message. Just a list of symptoms printed in bold, sterile font. Visual hallucinations. Auditory distortions. Fatigue. Burning skin sensation. Loss of taste. Feeling of being watched. Distrust of loved ones. Cognitive dissonance. The title at the top, Stage I. Cortical degeneration syndrome. It was fiction, completely fabricated. But the way Gerald read it, over and over, fingers tracing each word, I could see the terror take root. That night, he didn't speak during dinner. He just stared at the paper again and again, mouthing the words like they were a prophecy. I let the silence grow heavy. And then, just when it was unbearable, I added fuel. I saw a news article today, I said casually, about a local man who thought he was dying from a rare brain condition. Turned out, he was being poisoned by his own anxiety. He looked up, eyes hollow. Really? I nodded. It's amazing what the mind can do when it starts to believe something's wrong. He left the table without a word. At 1:11 a.m., I heard him vomiting in the downstairs bathroom. Guttural, violent. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched through the shadows. He was on the floor, hugging the toilet, sobbing. Please, I didn't mean to. That was the first time I saw regret. It almost made me stop, almost. But then I remembered the signature on the fake will. The smirk at my father's funeral. The night he told me to move on as if nothing mattered. So no, I didn't stop. Instead, I moved the journal, the one filled with Dad's suspicions, into Gerald's nightstand. Slid it right between his glasses case and his anxiety medication. Let him wake up and discover it. Let him think he had written it. Let him believe his own mind was trying to remind him of something too terrible to face. The next morning, he didn't come downstairs. When I brought up tea, I found him curled up in bed, clutching the journal like a child with a nightmare. "I don't remember writing this," he whispered. "You didn't," I said, brushing a hand over his forehead. "It's Dad's." He stared at me, pale as bone. "Then why does it sound like my voice?" And that, right there, was the crack. The moment where he stopped distinguishing his thoughts from my father's, where guilt and paranoia became one. I walked out of the room slowly, letting him sit in that haunted silence. I had broken something inside him. And now it was time to make him watch it rot. Gerald didn't speak for 2 days after finding the journal in his nightstand. Not a word, not to me, not to the mailman, not even to himself. He drifted around the house like a ghost that hadn't realized it died. He kept the journal pressed to his chest like a lifeline, flipping through its pages as if searching for answers or forgiveness. On the third morning, I found him sitting in the living room in complete silence, the curtains drawn, the lights off, and the journal open on his lap. The TV was on, but the screen was nothing but static. "You okay?" I asked softly. He looked up at me with hollow eyes. "Do you think it's possible for guilt to make you sick?" I sat down across from him, crossing my legs calmly. "Of course, guilt eats people alive. I feel like I'm not in my body anymore," he whispered, "like I'm watching myself from far away." That was what I wanted: detachment, isolation, dissociation. I needed Gerald to feel like he was drifting between dimensions, never quite grounded in truth, never certain what was real or who to trust. The mind will bend to the story it's told often enough. And I had told him, in every way but directly, that his mind was failing. He just needed one more push. That evening, I opened a browser window on his computer, left it on a page titled Symptoms of Early Psychosis, When the Mind Becomes the Enemy. I also edited the bookmarks bar just enough to make it look like he'd been researching for weeks: schizophrenia, paranoia, rare degenerative diseases. Then I left a sticky note on the desk in my own handwriting: "Call Dr. Carr back." It was bait. The next morning he took it. "Rebecca," he said hesitantly, meeting me in the kitchen, "you said you knew how to reach Dr. Carr again." I blinked as if unsure. "You said he didn't exist." I might be been mistaken. I need to talk to him." Perfect. I gave him a new number, a burner phone redirected through Jamie's encrypted line. Theo was ready. This time, Dr. Carr would escalate things. Gerald took the call in his study. I watched through the cracked door as he paced, nodding, writing things down on a yellow legal pad with the same urgency as a drowning man reaching for air. Theo's instructions were clear. Tell him that his symptoms match something real, something rare and hard to detect. Tell him that if untreated, it can lead to full disassociation. Tell him the condition is reversible, but only if he stays calm, remains isolated, and avoids emotional triggers. By the time the call ended, Gerald looked even paler than before. But he also looked obedient. "I need to rest," he said quietly. "I agree," I replied. "Let me take care of everything." He nodded, no resistance, just blind trust. Because even though he suspected me, feared me, somewhere he also still believed I was the only person trying to help him. That night I sat in the attic and wrote a new note, printed it in courier typeface, folded it 3 times, slid it under his door while he slept. "You saw it too, didn't you? In the mirror, you can't unsee it now. You know what it wants, confess. Or it will never leave." He found it in the morning and didn't come out of his room all day. Later that evening, he tore every mirror off the walls. I let him. The next time I entered his room, I brought him dinner. He didn't touch it. "I think I hurt someone," he whispered, staring at the blank spot on the wall where a mirror had once hung. "You should talk about it," I said gently. "Sometimes saying it aloud makes it easier." "I don't know if it happened," he said, voice cracking, "or if I just dreamed it." "Tell me anyway." He looked me straight in the eye. "Did I kill your father?" I didn't speak, I didn't move. I just let the silence do what words couldn't. That night, he tried to burn the journal. I stopped him on the surface to protect my father's words. But in reality, I needed him to read it again and again until it became his truth. He needed to believe it was his confession, not Dad's. The next morning, I caught him talking to someone in the hallway, but there was no one there. "Gerald?" I said softly. He turned to me, startled. He was here. "Who?" "My brother." My stomach turned with the thrill of it. "Dad." He nodded. He said it's not too late. "To do what?" Gerald didn't answer. But later that night, I heard him making phone calls, to the lawyer, to his accountant, to someone from his board of directors. He was trying to fix something, trying to make amends, trying to undo whatever crime he had now convinced himself he committed. It was beautiful, watching him claw at redemption while sinking deeper into the lie I'd built around him. He wasn't just doubting his mind anymore. He was confessing to a reality I invented. And the best part? He had no idea I was the one holding the strings. The doctor he trusted didn't exist. The illness he feared, fabricated. The guilt that consumed him, planted. And soon, he would be too far gone to ever come back. Gerald had always taken pride in his precision. His morning routine used to be sacred: wake at 6:30, 15 minutes of yoga, a protein smoothie with flax and chia, and 2 neatly placed multivitamins. Always from the same bottle. Always with the same glass of filtered water. That was before. Now he barely remembered to eat. And I had changed the pills. Not all of them, just enough. Enough to unbalance, not to harm. I replaced his magnesium with crushed sugar tablets. Swapped his ginkgo with passion flower to induce a subtle drowsiness. And in one of the vitamin capsules, I inserted a harmless herbal diuretic that made him feel just off. He took them every morning, like clockwork. The effects weren't instant. They didn't need to be. The trick was in the suggestion. Each pill made him second-guess what was happening to his body. The dizziness wasn't from fatigue, it was from the illness. The nausea wasn't his nerves, it was the progression. The disorientation, the forgetfulness, the muscle tension, all real enough, thanks to my chemistry, but meaningless in a medical sense. But Gerald didn't know that, because I told him nothing. He filled the blanks in on his own. That week, he began journaling obsessively. I watched him from the hallway, peeking through the crack in his office door. He wrote in looping, messy script, entire pages of observations about his physical symptoms, about moments he thought he blacked out, about voices he wasn't sure were there. 10:27 p.m., thought I heard Rebecca whispering from the hallway. Checked, no one there. 2:14 a.m., dreamed Dad stood at the end of my bed. Said, give it back. Woke up sweating. 3:30 p.m., Rebecca made me tea again. Bitter, could she be part of this? I underlined that last entry in his notebook with red ink while he slept. No explanation, just a single blood-colored line. When he found it the next morning, I heard him gasp. Then the thud of the journal hitting the floor. He didn't ask me about it. He didn't dare. But that night, he threw away all the food I had prepared. Left it untouched on the counter and ordered takeout instead. A smart move. But too late. The medication he should be stopped taking, he had grown too used to it, too conditioned to need it. Even if I hadn't altered the contents anymore, the pattern of dependency was set. Every pill reinforced the story I had carefully written. And then, I added a new twist. I placed a new bottle in the cabinet, one he hadn't seen before. White label, no branding, just a small note. Dr. Carr said take 2 at bedtime, helps with the voices. He didn't ask where it came from, he started taking them. I gave him a week's worth, inside. Melatonin and a few grains of valerian. Still safe, still legal. But with the placebo belief that they would silence the hallucinations, his own mind began manufacturing worse ones on the nights he forgot to take them. One night he ran screaming from his room into the yard. There in the mirror, there in the mirror. I found him under the porch light, panting, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket like a shroud. His eyes were wide, unfocused. Who's in the mirror? I asked calmly. I don't know, he whispered, but it's not me anymore. The next morning, I brought him breakfast and placed a single pill on the tray beside his orange juice. What is that? He asked. Something to help, I said softly, if you want. He stared at it like it was poison. But 5 minutes later it was gone, swallowed without a word. He needed something, anything to believe in. And he believed in that pill more than he believed in me. Perfect. Later that day, I moved the plan forward. While he napped, exhausted by whatever demons I'd convinced him were real, I entered his office and removed 2 folders from his filing cabinet. Financial records, the ones that proved he'd embezzled from the estate, ones I had already copied and sent to the press anonymously. Then I replaced them with different documents, fake evaluations from Dr. Carr, fabricated in Jamie's apartment the night before, full of phrases like, delusional episodes increasing in frequency. Patient believes deceased family members are speaking to him. Recommends voluntary inpatient psychiatric treatment. I left them in his locked drawer. I knew he would find them. I knew he would think he had written them, or that the doctor had, and he just didn't remember. The confusion would stew, and when it did, I would be waiting. Because soon, the real illness wouldn't be the fake one I'd invented. It would be the creeping realization that he could no longer trust anything, his eyes, his ears, or his past. He came to me later that evening with tears in his eyes. I think I need to be institutionalized, he whispered, just for a little while to be sure. My pulse spiked, I almost smiled. Almost. Let's not rush, I said gently. Let's talk about it in the morning. He nodded, and as he walked away, I knew he was broken. Not by violence, not by force, but by his own belief in a sickness that was never real. It started with a flicker. One dim light bulb above the hallway began to pulse, just slightly. Not enough to raise alarm, but enough to catch the eye. Enough to make someone stop and wonder, did I just see that? Gerald paused there for nearly a full minute, staring upward like the ceiling itself was taunting him. That's what I wanted. The illusions had to begin as whispers, unseen, uncertain, deniable. The kind that only torment the person who notices. And he noticed everything now. That night, I replaced 2 more bulbs around the house with flickering ones. Then I disconnected the ground wire from his bedside lamp. Just enough to cause a faint, harmless buzz when he touched the switch. Static, cold, invisible, but unnerving. His scream at midnight shook the house. I found him sitting on the bedroom floor, holding his hand like it was broken. It bit me, he stammered. The lamp it sparked. I examined it under the flashlight. Looks fine to me. It shocked me. I looked up at him, my face soft. Gerald, there's nothing wrong with this lamp. He looked from me to the bulb, and then back to me. You think I'm losing it, he said, eyes wide, voice trembling. No, I said, I think you're overwhelmed. He nodded slowly, but something in his eyes shifted. He no longer looked afraid, he looked terrified. Because somewhere deep down, he was starting to believe that the house, the very walls around him, were turning against him. And I had only just begun. The next day, I moved the chirper under the floorboards near his bathroom. Set it to emit a short, randomized high-pitched sound, barely perceptible to most, but when Gerald walked down the hall, he stopped. There it is again, he muttered. What? The squeak, the scratching, you really don't hear it. I shook my head. You haven't slept much, it's probably nothing. It's not nothing. His voice cracked like a broken mirror. That night I set the final piece. I slipped into his room at 3:20 a.m., tiptoeing with surgical silence. I placed a single photo on his nightstand, one I had doctored carefully, an image of my father, dressed in his Sunday suit, standing in Gerald's bedroom doorway. His eyes were red, his hands outstretched. The effect was subtle but chilling. Unnatural, next to the photo I left a tape recorder. Not digital, analog, old, unnerving in its existence. It was cued to play the soft sound of whispering. Nonsense phrases, reverse speech, wind through leaves. The occasional distorted Gerald. I set the timer to play just once, a few minutes after sunrise. I wanted him to wake up to it, and he did. He woke screaming. I let the sounds echo for 5 minutes before I entered. The photo was in his hand. The recorder was on the floor. His face, drained of color, looked up at me like a child begging a parent to say it wasn't real. I didn't do it, he said over and over. I didn't kill him. He wasn't just confessing. He was trying to bargain with the ghost he believed had come for him. I sat on the edge of the bed and touched his shoulder. It's okay, I whispered. He leaned into me, trembling. He's here, I feel him watching. I nodded, he is. His breath hitched. I saw him, he choked. In the hallway, in the mirror, in the photo. There is no photo, I said softly. He froze, turned to look at the nightstand. Empty. I had taken it the moment I walked in. I swear it was right there, he whispered. You need rest, Gerald. I'm going crazy. No, I said, you're remembering. His eyes flooded. It was then that I knew he'd reached the edge. He wasn't sleep-deprived anymore. He was unraveling at the seams. And he wasn't asking if he was losing it. He was asking how far until it all fell apart. He stayed in his room the entire day. Didn't answer when I knocked, didn't eat. That night he screamed again. This time louder, not from a sound, not from a hallucination, from nothing. I stood in the hallway listening to him sob. It's inside me, he said through the door. It's inside my blood. I didn't answer. I just turned and walked away, leaving him in the dark. Let him scream into the void. Let the silence echo back. By morning, he was sitting in the living room wearing one of my father's sweaters. It hung off him like a shroud. He didn't look at me as I walked in. Rebecca, he said quietly, do you think hell is a place? I tilted my head. What do you mean? Because I think I'm already in it. He lifted his hand. In it, the real will. I don't know how this came back. I don't know how it exists, but I know now I deserve it. Deserve what? To lose everything. The words hit the air like broken glass. I sat beside him, gently took the will and folded it. It's not about what you deserve, Gerald. It's about what you took. He didn't fight, didn't beg. He just looked at me with the haunted eyes of a man already buried. I think I'm dying, he whispered. You are, I said softly. But not the way you think. Gerald's pride had always been rooted in one thing. Not the inheritance, not the house, not even the family name. It was the business. The company my father had built brick by brick, that Gerald had taken over through lies, forged papers, and a betrayal so deep it split the family down to marrow. But now the business was slipping through his fingers, and he didn't even know it yet. He sat at the breakfast table that morning, dressed in yesterday's shirt, beard unshaven, eyes bloodshot. His laptop sat open before him, untouched. The screen had gone black, his fingers hovered over the keyboard like they forgot how to type. I missed a board call, he mumbled. I never miss board calls. Maybe you're stretched too thin, I said, pouring his coffee, which he no longer drank. I can't think, he muttered. Every time I try, my mind blanks like a door closing. I said nothing, because it was already closed. 3 days prior, Jamie and I had sent everything, the original will, the financial discrepancies, the embezzlement evidence, to Gerald's business partners and legal team. But we didn't stop there. We sent them anonymously, signed only, from someone who still believes in justice. The reaction was immediate. The CFO called an emergency audit. One of the shareholders filed a motion to freeze Gerald's executive authority. And most damning of all, the bank launched an internal investigation into multiple suspicious transfers made from the estate to a company in the Cayman Islands, under Gerald's name. But Gerald, he knew none of this yet. I watched him unravel from within while the outside world began circling him like vultures sensing a dying animal. Later that morning, a courier arrived with a thick envelope. Legal papers, the man explained with a sympathetic frown, from Hamilton and Frey. Gerald signed with shaking hands and tore the envelope open with a sense of dread he didn't bother to hide. I watched from the hallway. Page after page, he flipped through legal jargon. Financial review notices, cease access requests, and a formal notification of temporary suspension from all executive duties pending investigation. He looked up at me like a boy lost in the woods. What is this? I blinked, I don't know. I'm being removed, he whispered. They're freezing my accounts. They think I stole from the company. I said nothing, just walked over, picked up one of the documents, and read a line aloud. Pending verification of documents attached, including an unsigned version of the original will. I paused. Wait, isn't that your copy? He looked like he might vomit. I don't know how they got that, he mumbled. I didn't send anything. I raised an eyebrow, then who did? He stared at me, realization slowly blooming behind his tired eyes. But it was too big, too terrible to fully grasp. He didn't accuse me. He couldn't, because the idea that I was behind it meant accepting I had beaten him completely. And Gerald couldn't give me that satisfaction. Not yet. That night he tried to log into his company email. I watched from the shadows as he stared at the error screen. Access denied. Account suspended. He threw the laptop across the room. It shattered. And still I said nothing. I just left a note on the kitchen counter the next morning, in typewriter font folded once. You built your empire on bones. Now the foundation's giving out. You're not sick, you're guilty. No name, no signature. Just truth dressed as a threat. That evening he asked me to sit with him. I think I need to step away, he said quietly, from everything. Is that your decision? I don't know anymore. He sounded small, smaller than I had ever seen him. I can't remember what I did, he whispered. I know I stole, I know I lied, but I keep thinking about that night. Your dad, did I say something? Did I push him? I don't remember. Maybe your mind is protecting you, I said. Maybe it knows what you can't handle. He laughed, bitter and broken. I deserve this. He didn't know how right he was. 2 days later, a formal letter arrived from the board. Gerald Wexley was removed as CEO effective immediately. Pending results of the audit and potential legal charges, all his assets were frozen. I watched him open the envelope with trembling hands. Watched his lips move silently across every line. Watched his shoulders fold in. Everything's gone, he said softly. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just collapsed into the chair, stared out the window, and didn't move for 2 hours. I checked on him once. He didn't even blink. The man who once called me soft had nothing left. No empire, no family, no identity. He was hollow. I left another note that night, taped to his bathroom mirror. This one had only 4 words. Now do you remember? He found it in the morning. He screamed, but no one answered, not even me. It was easy to fool a man unraveling, but what really destroys him? When the world that once protected him, stood by him, abandons him. Gerald had always been the golden one. The uncle who hosted holiday parties in cashmere sweaters, the charming boardroom speaker, the man who handed out gifts too generous to question and too strategic to refuse. Even after my father died, people lined up to console him, not me, because they saw what he wanted them to see, grief wrapped in grace. But grief fakes poorly over time. And once the truth began to leak, his image cracked faster than his mind. It started with his younger sister, Aunt Karen. She called the house one morning, voice tight, clipped. "I got a call from the paper," she said. "There's a story about the will, about some fraud." I played dumb. "What story?" She didn't buy it. "Rebecca, did you leak this? Is it true? Do you think it's something I'd lie about?" She went silent, then, "I trusted him, we all did." That call ended without goodbye. Later that evening, Gerald received a voicemail from his godson, a high school senior he'd helped fund through private school. "My mom doesn't want me to see you anymore. She says there's some legal situation. I don't know what you did, Uncle G, but I don't know what to believe." Gerald didn't return the call. He just stared at the phone screen like it had betrayed him, but it didn't stop there. I saw the mail pile up, letters from old colleagues, longtime friends, even a few from board members, some demanding answers, some returning money. One simply read, "You're no longer welcome." He tried to call them, no one answered. And then, the one letter that ended it all arrived, from his own mother. Written in the neat cursive only a woman raised in the Depression could master. "Gerald, I don't know if the things they say are true, but if even half of it is, I failed you. Your brother loved you. He gave you everything and you spit on his memory. Until you can explain yourself, not to me but to God, you are not welcome in my home. Do not call, do not write. Mom." He read it once, folded it in half, and then sat there for hours without moving. I saw him from the kitchen doorway, lit only by the fading sun through the blinds, holding that letter like a funeral notice. That night I found him in the hallway, speaking softly to a photograph of my father. "I didn't mean to do it," he said. "I didn't plan it, I just saw an opportunity." He looked older than ever. "You didn't deserve it," he whispered. "But you were always better than me. I couldn't stand being in your shadow anymore." I stepped into the hallway. He didn't notice me at first. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hollow. "They're all gone," he said. "Every single person I counted on." "I'm still here," I said, voice level. He blinked. "Why?" "Because I want you to see it. Every crack, every loss. I want you to feel what you did to us." The silence stretched. And then, for the first time, he begged. "I'll give it all back. The money, the company, the house. Just tell them I'm not a monster." I knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Monsters don't always look like beasts, Gerald. Sometimes they look like family, like you." He sobbed, collapsed right there into my arms, and for a moment I held him, not out of pity, but as a victor would hold a defeated enemy just before the final blow. The next day, I called his lawyer under the guise of helping Gerald sort out his affairs. We arranged the necessary documents to transfer control of the estate, the house, and all personal assets back to me, pending legal revalidation of the original will, now being challenged formally. He didn't protest. He just signed. When I placed the pen in his hand, he didn't even ask what it was for. By now, he trusted me more than he trusted himself. That night, I sat in the living room where he used to host poker nights and lavish wine tastings. It was quiet, just me and the ticking grandfather clock. Gerald shuffled in, eyes puffy from lack of sleep. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured us both a glass of scotch, Dad's favorite. I handed him one. "I did," I said finally. He nodded, accepting that. "And now?" I took a slow sip. "Now I just want you to remember, every day, forever, not because you were caught, but because you broke everything." "I'm sorry," he whispered. I believed him, but that didn't mean I forgave him. He went to bed early that night. Didn't lock the door, didn't close the blinds. Like a prisoner settling into a cell he no longer resisted. And I looked at the house I grew up in, the one stolen and now returned, and wondered why I didn't feel triumphant. I had won. But something in me still felt hollow. Because revenge doesn't fill holes, it only widens them. It was almost poetic, the way Gerald started avoiding mirrors. Not at first. At first, he merely flinched. A glance too long, a reflection too sharp, but eventually he began to look through them, never at them. One morning, I found him in the bathroom, taping a towel over the mirror above the sink. His hands trembled as he worked. and when he turned around and saw me standing in the doorway, he didn't even try to explain. "I don't like what I see anymore," he muttered. I nodded as if I understood, but I did more than understand. I crafted it. It started small, a trick of light. I had subtly warped the glass of the mirror in his room by heating the back with a hairdryer until the silver backing began to ripple. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but for someone spiraling, it was enough to plant doubt. Then I swapped one of his bedside lamps with a lower wattage bulb, just enough to cast unusual shadows across the wall at night. The kind that moved just enough to feel alive. And one night, while he slept, I drew a faint red X on the inside of his mirror. It was water-soluble, invisible until steam hit it. He didn't notice it the next morning. But after his shower, when the steam fogged the glass, it appeared. A single, glowing red X over his own reflection's heart. I watched from the hallway as he stared into it, unmoving. I timed it perfectly. At that exact moment, I dropped a small marble in the hallway, just enough to clatter. He turned sharply, ran out of the bathroom. He didn't shower again for 3 days. From that day on, he began taping mirrors, first in his room, then in the hallway, eventually even the microwave. Any surface that could reflect he covered, like a man being hunted by his own image. One afternoon, I sat across from him in the kitchen. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were ringed with sleeplessness. He was wearing the same sweater, Dad's old one, and holding a spoon in his hand like it might attack him. "Rebecca," he said softly, "do you ever feel like there's someone else inside your body?" I tilted my head. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not me anymore," he continued. "Like there's another version of me, the one that did all the things I can't remember, the one I see in the mirror." I said nothing. He leaned forward, voice hushed. "I think that version of me is trying to come back, to finish what he started." "What did he start?" He stared down at his reflection in the spoon, then flung it across the room like it burned him. "I don't know," he whispered, "but I think it ends with me." That night I brought him dinner. He didn't touch it. Instead, he stood by the window watching the street. "He's coming," he said. "Who?" "My brother." I stepped into the room. "Gerald, he's dead." He looked at me slowly. "I know, that's why it's worse." I didn't respond, just reached into my pocket and placed a photograph on the table behind him. It was a manipulated photo, my father standing in the background of a family dinner, his face barely visible in the shadows. A silhouette, an outline, a presence. Gerald turned, saw it, and dropped to his knees. "I saw him last night, in the mirror." He said, "I'm running out of time." "You are," I said quietly. He looked up, stunned. I knelt beside him. "You lied, you stole, you erased him from this house like he never existed." "I know. You killed him." He didn't argue this time. He didn't try to deny it. He just nodded, slow, defeated. "I was jealous," he whispered. "Always second best, always the shadow. I thought if I had it all, I'd be free." "And are you?" He didn't answer. That night I left a final message on his mirror, written in washable paint, visible only under a blacklight. "I never left. You buried me, but the dead don't stay buried forever." I placed a small UV keychain light in his drawer. The next morning I watched him open it, saw him turn on the light, scan the mirror, and freeze. He dropped the flashlight, screamed, tore down every sheet, every towel, every covering in the house like they were alive. Mirrors shattered, glass flew. He cut his hand, bled into the sink. I ran in as he sobbed, cradling his hand. "It's okay," I said, wrapping his fingers in gauze. "It's over now." "No, it's not," he said. And for once he was right, it wasn't over, not for him. Not yet, because now he was the ghost, living inside a house full of mirrors that only reflected everything he had tried to destroy. By the time dawn broke the next day, Gerald hadn't slept in over 36 hours. His eyes had sunk so deep into their sockets that they looked like bruises. His lips were cracked, dry from muttering to himself through the night. The scabs on his knuckles hadn't even begun to close, still raw from the mirror shards he'd punched through with trembling fists. The house was silent except for him. He wandered barefoot, whispering to shadows, pressing his ear to the walls like they were breathing. He didn't even flinch when he stepped on broken glass. He was already somewhere far beyond pain. I watched him from the living room doorway as he stood in the foyer, staring at the front door, unmoving. "Gerald?" I called gently, no response. "Do you want me to call someone?" He turned slowly, like his body wasn't sure it was his. Then he dropped to his knees and begged. "Please," he said, "please make it stop." I walked toward him carefully, like one would approach a wounded animal. He didn't look up. "I see him when I close my eyes," he whispered. "Tom, your father, he doesn't talk anymore. He just stands there, just watches me." He pressed his bloodied hand to his chest. I can't breathe when I sleep. I feel like he's sitting on my chest, like he's in the room. I knelt beside him. He smelled like sweat and fear. I believe you, I said. He looked at me, tears streaking down his filthy cheeks. I'll do anything. I'll go to the police, I'll give it all back. The money, the house, just please tell him to leave me alone. I held his gaze. I don't think that's up to me. I don't want to die like this, he whispered. But you didn't care when it was someone else's death, did you? His face contorted. It was an accident. I leaned in closer. What was? I confronted him, he choked out. The day he said he was changing the will, I went to his office. We argued. He told me I'd wasted my life, that I didn't deserve a damn cent. His voice cracked. He was holding the new will, said he was taking everything away, said he was going to expose me. And what did you do? He stared past me at something I couldn't see. I pushed him. Silence, I didn't mean to, he tripped. He hit the corner of the desk, his head, there was blood. I didn't move, didn't speak. I panicked, hid the papers, cleaned up. Called the doctor, lied, said it was his heart, said I found him collapsed. I waited, let the truth rot in the air between us. And the will? I finally asked, I burned it. But he made a copy. He nodded, I didn't know. Until it showed up again. He buried his face in his hands. I thought I was so smart, so careful, but now everything's gone, I don't know who I am anymore. I stood, you're a man who killed his own brother. He didn't deny it. And that was the final surrender. Not to me, to himself. I walked away, leaving him in a pile on the hardwood floor. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, washing the dust from the porch. Inside, the man who once held everything now clutched at nothing. Not pride, not property, not power. Only guilt. Hours passed. He didn't move. Later that evening, I heard him walking again. Quiet, slow footsteps down the hall. I found him sitting at the foot of my father's bed. The one Gerald had ordered removed months ago, but I had returned to the guest room 2 nights prior. He was tracing the wood of the headboard with his fingertips. He loved this bed, he said quietly. Used to say it made him feel grounded, like no matter what storm came, this bed would hold him. He turned to me. Do you think he forgives me? I sat beside him. No. He nodded. I didn't think so. Then from his pocket he pulled out a small envelope. Inside, the forged will, torn, crumpled, but intact. I kept it, he said. Even after I saw the real one, I told myself I might need it someday. Just in case. I took it from him, turned it over slowly. It's not worth anything now. I know. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I used to think I was the smartest person in the room. That if I just planned hard enough, lied well enough, I could be anyone I wanted to be. And now, I just want to go back to when your father still trusted me, to when I hadn't become this. But you did. He closed his eyes. I did. For a moment I felt something strange. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but a pang of something human, the kind of ache that comes when you watch someone you once feared become a ruin before your eyes. Do you want help? I asked. He opened his eyes again. No, I want peace. I stood, walked to the door, and turned back. There's no peace until the truth comes out. He didn't follow me, didn't ask what I meant. Maybe he knew, maybe he was ready. Or maybe he just didn't care anymore. That night, I filed the police report. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the quiet, deliberate force of someone who has finally finished digging a grave deep enough for the past. And in that grave was a man who had once been my uncle, now just a name and a confession. The morning the police came, the sky was gray, the air thick with a strange stillness, as if even the weather knew what was about to end. I was already awake. I had packed a small bag. I didn't need much. The house, the one my father built, loved, and died in, was finally mine again, but it no longer felt like home. Gerald sat in the living room, exactly where I'd left him the night before, staring blankly at the fireplace. He didn't ask why I was dressed. He didn't move when the police car pulled up outside. He didn't flinch when the officers knocked on the door. I opened it. Mr. Gerald Wexley? One of them called into the house. Gerald raised his hands slowly, like a man surrendering to fate. They read him his rights. He didn't argue. Didn't resist, didn't say a word. As they walked him past me, his eyes met mine for the first time in days. They were vacant, broken, but underneath the exhaustion I saw something else. Relief. As if this confession, consequence, collapse was the only way out of the maze I'd built around him. He turned to me, voice low. You did all this. I didn't blink, you did it to yourself. And then he was gone. The silence that followed wasn't triumphant. It was heavy. The kind that settles after a long, drawn-out war. I stood in the doorway long after the car disappeared down the road, long after the wind stirred the porch chimes. Long after I should have moved, I stepped back inside. The house was mine, legally, technically, symbolically, but it no longer felt like a victory. I walked through every room. The living room still smelled like scotch and guilt. The kitchen still had the faint burn of candles I used in my illusions. The hallway bore marks on the wall from where Gerald had clawed during his breakdown. I stepped into the guest room, my father's old room. Everything was where I'd returned it. The headboard, the book on the nightstand, the faded quilt Mom had sewn years ago. I sat on the bed and stared at the photo frame still cracked from the fall it had taken weeks ago. The one with a picture of me and Dad, laughing during a fishing trip when I was 13. Back when things were simpler. Back when love didn't come with conditions or secrets. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out and traced the image. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. "He's gone." But my voice cracked because what followed that sentence was harder to admit, and it doesn't feel like I thought it would. I stayed there for hours, sometimes silent, sometimes sobbing. Not because I regretted anything, but because everything had changed. The revenge had worked. Every plan, every whisper, every fake diagnosis, every manipulated memory, it had all done exactly what I intended. But now all I had was a house. And echoes. The journalist who had broken the story called 3 times that week. I didn't answer. They published anyway. Words like fraud, murder suspect, mental decline, executive scandal, secret will, haunted niece. The public devoured it. Gerald became a symbol of greed's fall. I, the mysterious relative who exposed it all. They didn't know the half of it. Jamie came by once. She stood on the porch, not stepping in. "You did what no one else could," she said. "You ended it." I nodded. "Do you feel better?" I didn't answer because I didn't feel better. I felt finished. That night I burned the notes, the redacted journal, the scripts I'd written. The sticky notes, even the photo I had forged, the one of Dad in the mirror. It all went into the fireplace. One by one, a ritual, not to forget what I'd done, but to let go of who I had to become to do it. The final page was the original will. I held it a moment longer. I had already filed it. The estate was legally mine. My father's wishes were restored. Justice, if such a thing existed, had been done, but I didn't need this page anymore. So I lit it, watched the flames curl the edges, watched the ink darken, blister, vanish. And when the last ash drifted upward, I walked out the front door barefoot, stepped onto the porch and breathed. The air tasted new, like rain. Like smoke, like endings. Weeks passed. The house grew quiet again, but not haunted. I painted the guest room, planted new roses. I kept one mirror, just one, and every now and then I caught myself staring into it, not looking at my face, but searching the eyes reflected back at me. Wondering who I had become. Not a villain, not a hero, something in between. A girl who had been forgotten and remembered herself through fire. A niece, a daughter, a shadow, and now? A woman standing alone in the house that was finally, rightfully hers. But still echoing with ghosts.